Hey, this is ADVTRES, and we're going to cover a 5-day adventure trip we did to the Alvord Desert. We said goodbye to the cats, packed up a few essentials, and grabbed a map. So the trip was 5 days of overlanding with 6 nights of camping. 1 night at McKay, 1 night at Poverty Basin, 2 nights in the Hart Mountain Antelope Refuge, 1 night at Willow Creek Hot Springs, and 1 night at the Alvord Hot Springs. Now, this was my first time in doing a trip in southeastern Oregon, and it was a huge surprise. We started out in Bend, and you can follow the little mouse showing the different tracks. If you'd like to get this map, please feel free to leave me a comment, and I can share with you the Gaia map. There's just a ton of things to see out here, and it was really eye-opening for me. There were antelopes, petroglyphs, old ranches, old forts. Pretty much every night we camped, we were able to enjoy a hot spring. So if you haven't made it out to this side of the country, I recommend it. And if you picked up anything from my channel, you've picked up that I'm into prehistory. And one of the things about this area is this is a map from 1800s. And you can see the area where Alice is sitting is actually surrounded by a variety of different tribes. And where Alice is sitting is kind of centrally located to where all these tribes are. And in doing my Google research, I came across a prehistory site that I had to see. And that is this site. And you can see the large circle there with the line across it. That's 0.17 miles across. In all my time exploring, I've never come across something as unique as this. There were 3 of us going on this trip, and the first night was really a meetup night, and I met up with one of my buddies at McKay Campground, which is a really nice campground right outside of Bend. And then the next day we met up with the 3rd of our little band, and we headed into the desert. Now the first day it was raining, and when driving in the desert in the rain is probably not the best thing. The weather said the rain was going to be off and on, but it did make it very dramatic. It really changed the landscape. And one of the things we got to do kind of right off the bat was go cave exploring. And this is actually inside the cave, one of the larger caves. I think it's Boyd Cave. And it goes on and on for quite a ways. We didn't go the full distance, and it's a must-see. So if you're out there, definitely go check out Boyd's Cave. If you're creeped out, it's just going to happen, but it is a totally unique and kind of surreal experience. The next thing we stumbled on was the Lost Forest research area, which is a huge pine forest kind of out in the middle of the desert, which you're not expecting. And on the way from the forest, you can head over to the sand dunes, and then on the other side of the sand dunes is Fossil Lake. So read up about Fossil Lake if you're into that kind of history. It's totally fascinating. We were not able to make it to Fossil Lake. The roads were pretty mucky. It had rained pretty heavily, but the ride out there was beautiful. And the sand dunes are just amazing. Now, from the sand dunes, we were heading across the desert to a location called the A6 crash site. This is a memorial to commemorate the crash of a U.S. Navy Grumman A6 intruder bomber, which went down during a low-level night training mission on September 9, 1973. Both crew members, Lieutenant Alan Kohler, age 27, and his navigator, Lieutenant Philip Dummel, age 33, were both killed in the crash. And not to foreshadow anything, but as you can see from some of the video, it was raining, at least on our trip out there. This is silty soil, and it is kind of a trek to get out to this site. So plan at least a half a day just to get to this site and back out to some campground. Additionally, if you're wanting to drive all the way to the crash site, there is almost a near vertical ascent that you must do to then reach another, 3-mile or 4-mile trek across some very rocky desert road to actually reach some of the wreckage. It is very scenic going out there, and again, be respectful if you go all the way to the plain. There is still quite a lot of material out there. And this is from the top of the ascent looking down. By the time we left the crash site, we were headed towards Poverty Basin, coming across a lot of cattle fencing. And luckily enough, we found a nice campsite near an old cattle corral. From the cattle corrals, we headed out the next day, still following our tracks across Poverty Basin, but this time we were going to make a little detour to Lake Albert. Coming over one of the last rises, we were able to see Lake Albert out in the distance, which is a historical lake in the area. And around this lake, there are a lot of stone circles from ancient peoples who used to collect fish and the fly larvae around this lake. Now, while fly larvae may sound kind of weird to us in modern terms, in history, it was a great and easily collectible source of protein for early peoples. And even some translations of Paiute actually mean fly eater. From Lake Albert, we then drove over to the Hart Mountain Antelope Refuge and set up camp. There is an established hot spring there that you can take a dip in, as well there is an undeveloped hot spring that you can also use. Not far from the hot springs is Petroglyph Lake, which is about a 2-mile hike out and a 2-mile hike back. Lots of petroglyphs, very beautiful to see, and definitely worth the trek. Now, the following day, we were going to head out to, remember that prehistory site I'd showed you at the beginning? We were going to head out to go see it. And on our way there, we had identified on Gaia which kind of route to take, and it was going to be a little scenic. So we headed out, and we passed a dead-end sign. And we were like, they must have forgotten to take the sign down, and we had a little huddle between ourselves, and we're like, there was no way that this dead-end sign could apply to all the tracks that we were looking at. I mean, there were like 4 or 5 different trails. There was no way it could like cut off all those trails. So we continued forward. Now, the road that we were heading out towards was heading towards Robinson Draw, Guano, and West Road Gulch, and then also up to Antelope Springs. And the road is pretty rough, right? I mean, there's nothing like super technical on the road, but you're talking sharp lava rocks, bumpy baby heads the entire way. I mean, it is quite a trek. So to get from the main park road kind of out to where you saw the line stop on the map took us, like a good hour and a half, maybe 2 hours of trekking through this desert terrain. Now, I'm personally not a speed driver. I'm sure if you were driving your Ford Raptor, you'd do it in like 15 minutes. I am not. I'm gentle on my rig, so yeah, it took us a little bit of time. We're getting kind of excited now because we can see something up ahead, but what we saw we were not expecting. It was a fence going all the way across the desert, no workaround, and it was full stop. I mean, we were not going any further. Now, I'm not going to say this isn't kind of a bummer. Now, a couple little highlights here. The southeastern desert of Oregon the southeastern portion of Oregon is pretty remote. I mean, really remote. I know if you've seen some of my Black Rock videos, you can hear me, it's remote. The southeast is, so take Black Rock and then like make it even more remote. We went through Field Station and Plush. Yes, they have gas stations. Yes, they have food. Yes, you can get ice. But that's about it. There's really no services out here. So given all that whinging, yeah, we did hit kind of full stop. The way we were going to get to the prehistory site, we couldn't go there, so we had to kind of backtrack. But you know what? It was all worth it. It was a beautiful adventure. The lesson learned here is really check out the signs. Another traveler had actually done the same thing and found out it was locked. Had we read it, had we noticed it, it would have saved us some time. So remember that prehistory site I mentioned earlier? So it turns out it was freaking awesome. It's a very beautiful space. I would recommend if you're out there being able to go see it. There's water available very close to the site, a freshwater pool. And in Antelope Canyon, which is right next to the site, there are pictographs. Now, these are not petroglyphs, they're pictographs, which are much older. From there, we headed back to our campground, and it was amazing. We actually came across several herds of pronghorn antelope. Now, kind of for a Central Californian, we don't see these very often. Now, I've talked to people, and they have mentioned that they have seen pronghorn at some point or another. I personally haven't. And the only other time I've seen pronghorn is in Black Rock. And there it was like 1 or 2, and I thought, the heavens had opened up and the universe had smiled on me just to allow me to see one. Might as well to see, you know, an entire herd and family of these very majestic and beautiful animals in a refuge where, at least outside of hunting season, they are protected. So if that wasn't awesome enough, we were leaving the Hart Mountain Antelope Refuge, heading out towards Post Meadows. So this is kind of going southwesterly, heading out of the refuge area. And our goal was really to head to the Spalding Wilderness area. Now remember that pink line I had showed you earlier, and I said, hey, look, we didn't do that. We decided to bypass that. So we were heading out towards Post Meadows, and in some of my in some of the maps that I have, because I collect historic maps, there had been noted an old post or fort that was out in this area. And actually, so there's a lot of dispersed camping out here. It is actually very beautiful. You can see the aspens, there's lots of little rivers. It's just very, very scenic. So if you do go out to Hart Meadow, definitely spend a day or two, you know, enjoy the Hot Springs, go see Petroglyph Lake. If you can get out to Antelope Springs, you know, where the petroglyph sites are, definitely, you know, and you're into hiking and that kind of thing, then I would recommend that. And then up in this section of the refuge, there is a old ranch that you can park and go check out. And then we were looking for the old fort that was out here. And again, it was getting a little long in the day, and you know, we didn't find any remnants of it, but it is out there. So it's definitely something that if you're staying in, or if you're planning a trip out there, then I would plan, you know, 2 days to enjoy, you know, the campsite and all the sites around that. And then plan for 2 or 3 days just to explore, heading out towards Post Meadows, because there is a lot of country out there and some historical sites, you know, if you're into that. Now, one of the things we came across that one of our group had been aware of are these two grave markers. I'm assuming this is U.S. infantry. This is the date of deaths were 1867 and 1866, which is on kind of the far end of the immigrant trains. So not exactly sure what happened to these two individuals, but again, something, you know, for the history buffs out there to kind of research on and try to find. Now, the immigrant migration was, you know, you could say 1840s to, you know, the end of the 1860s. And then, you know, the trains connected the Americas, and there were no longer really a need to travel by wagon anymore. Now, once you're outside of the Hart Mountain Refuge or Antelope Refuge, you enter an area called Guano Creek Wilderness, heading towards kind of the Spalding Wilderness area. And this area, you know, it's kind of a trek out there, and it does take quite a bit to, you know, I would plan, you know, just a day to travel that distance. Again, if you're a more speedy driver or, you know, less interested in stopping and taking pictures of scenic vistas or collecting rocks, then I'm sure you could do it in a shorter amount of time. So one of the kind of funny things that happened to me, and honestly, this is totally in retrospect, right? We are driving, and again, like I said about Black Rock, you're really out in the out. And so we're driving, and I don't know, by then it was kind of late in the day, and out in the distance, way up in the distance, I saw a ranch house, and I thought, my gosh, what, you know, and honestly, this entire trip, you're not seeing any houses, right? And I thought, oh my gosh, how great, you know, if something happened, there would be a ranch house and you could at least get to it. And then we actually get up to it, and it was Sherk Ranch. and which is an abandoned ranch house that you can go explore. Again, please be respectful of it, but it is actually a nice little kind of time capsule of early ranching out in this area. And I think Sherk Ranch was an original homestead dating back to the 1880s, right? And Sherk then purchased it sometime in around 1883, and then 1910 built his ranch house and started his cattle operation. And I think Sherk was kind of a visionary for his time, right? He commented that he treated all his hands fairly. Besides cattle, they also raised horses. And in the upstairs, there's like this rectangular room, which you'll see in a minute. And he said that he kept billiards and games up there for his ranch hands to play. Now, I don't know when the ranch stopped operations, right? Sherk had sold it off, he built it in, the late 1880s, sold it off around 1919, 1920. And then it probably passed around hands and was deeded to the park in 2009. Now, for you history buffs out there, the Sherk Ranch has 7 historic buildings located on it and 1 graveyard. So have fun hunting for history. After Sherk Ranch, we headed out to the main highway, stopped at Fielding Station and gassed up. You can see $6.85 a gallon, so, be prepared. And then we were making our way to Willow Creek Hot Springs, which is outside of Whitehorse. Now, as you're making your way along this section, and this is mostly going towards Rosebriar Canyon to the Willow Creek Hot Springs, you're going to pass a couple of these stone houses. Now, I tried to do some internet research and I couldn't find any history about them. The whole fact that they're made out of stone, were they old forts? Were they old traveling stations? I don't know. So if you know any history about, now we passed 2 of them. If you know any history about them, that would be awesome if you could share it in the comments below. I'd love to know the history about them because a couple of the buildings also had extra accessory buildings, maybe for horses or hands, I'm not sure. So these are really cool and definitely worth a check out. And then one of my favorite hot springs as part of the trip was the Willow Creek Hot Springs. It's just beautiful. It reminded me a lot of Soldier Meadows. So if you get out that way, definitely check it out. And there's the Willow Creek camp area. There are only a few sites. I don't know if it gets crowded out there or not. So there is dispersed camping, I'm sure, on the backside of the hill. We were lucky enough to get a campsite right by the hot springs. And again, besides outside of Soldier's Meadow, this was one of my favorite places to soak. Now, instead of heading directly to Alvord, we did do a little side trip around Whitehorse Butte to go check out 2 historic sites. I'm going to say if you've made it out this far, definitely try to see as much as you can, right? Who knows if we're going to pass this way again in our lives, right? We're grateful for every day we have. And these 2 sites are really unique for those history buffs out there. You can see the Willow Creek Ruins, which are 2 homesteads that were built by brothers to manage their cattle operations. Now, I couldn't find a ton of information on the internet about the brothers, about their lives, what they did, and the ruins are amazing. They definitely echo some of the crofts that my husband and I saw when we went exploring in Scotland. I mean, the building, the architecture, the way the lintels are done definitely has echoes of that. I mean, walking through these, if you didn't know it, you might as well be in Scotland. Walking through some of the old crofts. So definitely worth a look around while you're there. And while you're kind of, taking in the sights and thinking about the history, if you walk a little farther down, you'll be able to see the creek that they used to supply water to the homes, which must be a year-round creek because we were there in October and it still had a pretty good water supply. And here you can see the two brothers' houses. One is in the foreground in the front, and then where the red arrow is pointing is the other brother's house. So from there, we had camped at the Willow Creek Hot Springs, went and saw the brother's house, and then headed out to the Alvord Desert. We did go looking for one fort that we saw on one of the maps we had, but it was on the Whitehorse Ranch, and we could not secure permission to go see it. So coming down the mountain, there are two playas. One is a smaller one, and then you hit the larger one. The smaller one was easygoing. We didn't hit any soft spots. The larger one, and I'm not sure if it's larger than Black Rock or not. If you know, put it in the comments. But when we came off the playa towards the end, we hit a lot of mud and almost got stuck. And we found one exit, but there was a chain across it. And they wanted $10 to open the chain. And we weren't willing to go back into the mud pit again and potentially get stuck. So one of our group actually rented one of these little Quonset huts for the night. And then me and my other partner, we slept in our rigs. It is kind of surreal in these little, this is the Alvord Hot Springs. Would I recommend this hot springs? I'd recommend going in the spring, but not necessarily staying at this site. There's plenty of dispersed camping around it. So that is the end of kind of a 6-day adventure from Bend, Oregon, really out to Winnemucca, Nevada, right? Because that's where I came out of at the end of the trip. The highlights really are around the history, the prehistory, the scenery, the wildlife, and the hot springs. We met a couple, I think it was at Hart Mountain, and they mentioned and provided us a location to go view the Mustangs. They said the road is pretty rough up to that location, but I think if you're into photography, then that is like one of those kind of must-dos. And for me, being into, you know, early immigrant history, early people's prehistory, this was absolutely amazing to be able to see so many petroglyphs and so many prehistory sites, and to be able to see a prehistory site and walk it that I have never seen in my life is just amazing. And lastly, as you go out, tread lightly. These resources and locations have been part of our natural history for thousands of years, so please keep them that way. So until next time, this is ADVTRES out, and I hope to see you down the trail.